guys, welcome to another episode of Banter and Brews. I'm your host, Will, and we got a couple of guests with us today. Across from me here, we got Doran. What's going on, man?
What's going on, man? Thanks so much for having me on the podcast, man. I greatly appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Thanks for coming out. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Do a little introduction for our audience.
Sure. So I'm a small business owner here in the local community. I own an insurance agency called Burnside Insurance Group. But the reason I'm here tonight is probably because of my extracurricular activities. I'm an avid I won't say bourbon connoisseur, but I'm a guy that enjoys bourbon and whiskey a lot, right? And then I also enjoy cigars. So we have a podcast called High Proof Ashes that we do, which features some different bourbons, spirits, but mostly bourbon and whiskey. And then, of course, we smoke cigars while doing that as well. So we're going to taste some great things tonight and give some opinions.
Yeah, and once again, I said guests. As you can see, it's just the two of us right now, but we got another guest zooming in with us, the master distiller at Hard Truth, Bryan.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for zooming in. We really appreciate it.
It's going to be fun. Drink through some whiskey and tell a little bit about our story and hopefully have a good time.
Oh, yeah. So
absolutely.
With that being said, where do we want to start?
First of all, let's get some whiskey in your glass so we can have a proper conversation. So let's start with our Hard Truth Sweet Mash Bourbon. They're in the black label with the pewter. Yeah, that's a good one. So we consider that kind of our everyday our daily drinker kind of bourbon here at the distillery. We've got that one down at 90 proof, which makes it a little bit easier to get the day started, and makes great cocktails, but excellent as a neat sipper, and sits on the shelf at about $45. So for an actual grain to glass craft bourbon manufacturer, that's making 100% of their own juice, it's a pretty damn good price in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
But so I'll let you guys have a little sip of that. And so for folks that maybe have heard of Hard Truth or maybe not so familiar, we are a grain to glass distillery in Brown County, Indiana, about an hour and a half north of Louisville, Kentucky, hour south of Indianapolis, in this beautiful little part of the country in southern Indiana. Everybody thinks about Indiana and like cornfields and flatlands, but Brown County is where the Laurentide ice sheet stopped and pulled back. So we've got hills and hollers, big giant hardwood trees where actually a lot of the oak barrels that go into bourbon making are grown. And we've got a big, beautiful distillery there, 325 acres.
Wow.
It was been called the adult Disneyland of spirits by, I think, Vine Pair had an article. But we've got a beautiful distillery, 300-seat restaurant, 1,000-person outdoor music venue. We do distillery tours. We do inside the barrel tours. We do side-by-side ATV tours where we drive, you drink, and you go out in the hills and hollers and down in the creek bottoms, and they do 4 different tastings out there. It lasts about an hour and 15 minutes. So I guarantee you, if you come to our distillery, you're going to have an excellent, excellent time.
Oh yeah. I've seen some videos of the property on YouTube, and what was it? I think I heard something, once again, you already kind of said like Disneyland, but there was a difference between Disneyland and the compound. What was it again? Something about like Disneyland's make believe we're here, we're real. This is all like a real experience.
Yeah, a lot of Disneyland or Disney World, when you learn about it, it's kind of all a facade. It's like it looks like it's something, but behind there's kind of a bunch of tunnels, and so a lot of it's make believe. But we're the real deal. So we're real people in a real place making honest whiskey. I think that a big differentiator for us. Oh, by the way, what'd you think about that sweet mash bourbon?
It's very good. I'm thinking the nose it's hard for me to pick up right now.
Yeah, it's just the nose is sweet, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's absolutely delicious, to be completely honest. At such a low proof,
we tend to draw a lot of fruit kind of notes out of our whiskeys. We've right from the beginning, especially with our rye whiskeys, we tend to draw a lot of fruits, a lot of sweet notes. A lot of our whiskeys are very dessert forward. And I think a lot of that comes from our sweet mash process. For your folks out there that maybe aren't familiar or heard of sour mash, but not sweet mash, essentially sweet mash is you're starting with fresh water, fresh grain, and fresh yeast every single mash in. And as long as you can control consistency and control bacterial contamination in your fermenters, making sweet mash creates a whiskey that's a lot more bright, fruity, sweet, a little bit softer on the palate overall. And I cut my teeth kind of with Shane and Pat at Wilderness Trail Distillery, and they kind of helped us to design our system so that we could run sweet mash. So the first time, but I'm a palate driven kind of guy, so I only care about, does it taste good, right? I mean, it makes for a cool story, but does it taste good? So the first time I ever tasted a real sweet mash whiskey out of Wilderness Trail before they had released anything just kind of blew my mind. So from that moment forward, we've had our sights set on sweet mashing. And again, everything in those bottles in front of you was grains grown by our farmers, mashed, fermented, distilled, and aged right there at Hard Truth. We don't blend anybody else's whiskey in. It's all ours.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was about to say, when you start talking about the fruitiness, I feel like on taste profile, I was getting maybe some green apple stuff going on there. It was like a real bright flavor, like what you were saying.
Yeah, and like I said, that's our that's our standard bourbon mash bill. So that's 73% corn, 19 rye, and 8 malted barley. So it's a pretty familiar mash, bourbon kind of mash bill. It's not quite a high rye bourbon. But that's the one that if you come to visit us in one of our bars, most of our bourbon cocktails will be made with that, but it's great as a neat sipper. But again, I think, one of the things that for all the big bourbon fans that are out there now, and, you go to the shelves and there's so many new brands, and a lot of them are great. The whiskey's great. The branding's great. The marketing's cool. But they don't really have a distillery. They've just created a brand on borrowed whiskey. So I think that's one of the major things that Hard Truth brings to the table is, we're the real deal. We put in the investment and started making whiskey and didn't release it until it was ready.
What are some more thoughts we had about the whiskey?
So honestly, the first time I had it, I didn't have it on a clean palate. So I had smoked a cigar early in the day. Tasting it today on a fresh, clean palate, it is amazing, right? It's way more pleasurable. Of course, smoking cigars can ruin the palate for you, but it's something I do, so right. I'm used to it. So I normally taste with cigar, without cigar, and man, this is definitely enjoyable without a cigar. Like it just opens up so much more on my palate. So quite surprising how good it was in comparison.
I really feel like either a cigar really makes a bourbon drinking experience
absolutely
really fantastic, or all you'll taste is cigar and then some fiery mouth going on.
So you've definitely got to make sure that you pair it correctly, right? And that's a lot what we do on our podcast, trying to make sure that we pair the right cigar with the right bourbon or whiskey, right? That day, I remember specifically, I smoked a really heavy cigar. This is a lighter proof. So you're going to want to go with something a little bit lighter on the palate so that you just don't overwhelm the spirit that you're drinking, right? So tasting it today, I am very happy that I tasted it again on a clean palate because it is phenomenal.
So difference between all these whiskeys we have on the table, we got the wheated bourbon, we got the sweet mash bourbon, we got the rye. Can you tell us a little bit more the differences between these while we try the next bottle? And what's that?
Yeah, sure. Well, let's get you guys a pour of that sweet mash rye. And just before you have a sip of it, if you haven't tried the sweet mash rye before, this is really a whiskey lover's whiskey. I mean, it's our boldest mash bill. There's no corn in it, so it's going to be 94% rye, 6% malted barley. So you want to talk about a whiskey that'll stand up to a cigar. This one definitely will. But then also we bottle this at cask strength. So I'm not sure which batch that is. If you wouldn't mind, look on the front. You can maybe look at the proof, but
what we got right here is batch number 5. 116. Guys, 116 proof.
Yeah, you can smell the proof on this one.
Yeah.
You can smell the proof.
So we got 58% by volume.
What I love to do with that sweet mash rye is we do 30 barrel batches. So we're a true small batch. So when we blend together those 30 barrels, whatever the proof comes out, we put it right in the bottle exactly as it comes out. So this is our biggest and boldest expression of rye. And you ask a great question about the difference between, the different mash bills. And, when people hear, there's a lot of different talk about whiskeys, American whiskey, rye whiskey, bourbon whiskey, single malt whiskey. really, in the simplest terms, between bourbon and rye, you're looking at how much corn or how much rye is in the mash bill. So in order for it to be bourbon, there are other rules as well, but it has to be at least 51% corn
Mhm.
in order to be called bourbon. Now, other things you have to do. You can't distill it above 160 proof. It's got to go in a new charred oak container, which is typically a barrel. And it can't go in that barrel any higher than 125 proof. Now, technically, it spends 1 second in that barrel, and you could take it out and call it bourbon. But that's really not going to save the character of the bourbon, because that wood's got to give what it's going to give. So, in order to call it a straight bourbon whiskey, it's got to be in that barrel for at least 2 years. And then to the next one that you're talking about, the bottled in bond, our wheated bourbon that you have there, it's bottled in bond. In order for it to be called bottled in bond, it has to be aged at least 4 years, under the direction of one master distiller. All the whiskey has to come from one season, which is either January to July, or January to the end of June, beginning of July to end of December. And so really with the bottled in bond, anytime you see bonded or bottled in bond on a bottle of bourbon, you are really getting the truest expression of that distillery, because you can't blend in older barrels that boost the flavor profile. You can't blend in anyone else's whiskey. And it all has to be that mash bill. So it was really something that I really had my sights set on from the very beginning, was that when we first launched our bourbon, it would be a bottled in bond. But let's go back to that sweet mash rye. So what are you guys getting on the notes on that one?
Oh, I mean, for me at least, the nose is completely different.
Yeah, so the proof is on the nose, right? There's definitely some proof, but here's what I'll tell you: it does not drink at 116 proof.
No,
not even close. I mean, it's just.
Can you believe the sweetness in that whiskey with there being
not even
corn?
A little bit.
I mean, that's the thing
There's
that always
a lot
blows
of
everybody's mind.
Caramel, maybe burnt sugar on the nose. It's super sweet, completely different than the bourbon. And then just get into a lot of I wouldn't even call it like peppery. It's like baking
just
spice.
Just a little rye spice on it, right? Just
a
tad bit to let you know it's there, but nothing overwhelming. I think any rye lover would probably fall in love with this, to be completely honest.
Yep.
It's a very good.
Well,
and
I'll also tell you that it's getting better now, because people are really educating themselves more about American whiskeys. But even as little as 3 years ago, I can't tell you how many times I would hear, "Oh, I'm not really a rye guy." I mean, I've heard that literally thousands of times. And so I'll say, "Oh, okay, well then let me pour this for you." And not telling them it was even a rye. And they're like, "Wow, that bourbon's incredible. Which one is that?" And I said, "That's our sweet mash rye whiskey. There is not one kernel of corn that was used to make that whiskey. So you do like rye. You just haven't had the right one yet." So I will say that when we do bourbon tastings, I do bourbon tastings all around the country with different bourbon groups and all kinds of different folks. And I always leave the sweet mash rye in the tasting. And for my real hardcore bourbon fanatics, the people that really are into it, almost always is the favorite pour of the night.
So you sound like me when I'm talking about beer to people. And the people are like, "Oh, I don't drink beer." And it's like, well, you just haven't had the right beer yet.
I'm that guy.
I'm telling you. Guy. Okay. We're going to have another episode. Guy. We're going to have another, we're going to find you a beer you like.
All right.
Because it varies so much. It's not just like, your standard domestic lagers anymore. We got so much available to us, and easily available. And once again, kind of like I said, like, I know a lot of people that aren't fans of rye. I kind of grew up, my brother Rossman, he's a bourbon dude.
Yeah,
he definitely is. But me, I really like rye. I like Scotch. Irish whiskey, not so much into Irish whiskey, but I kind of like a lot of different weird spirits. And rye's kind of always held a special spot for me. And y'all's rye, I mean, the first time I had it, it like blew my socks off.
Yeah, it's impressive.
We're going to continue down the rabbit hole here. And,
here we
learn
go.
some more. So, last bottle.
Yeah, so we've got our Hard Truth Sweet Mash Wheated Bourbon bottled in bond. So this one is, wheated bourbons, it seems like, are very, very popular. But what I've found is, for some experienced enthusiasts, that like bolder whiskeys. A lot of times wheated bourbons tend to be a little bit soft and not quite as exciting for folks. Usually wheated bourbons are good like intro whiskey for people. What I love about this wheated bourbon, and if you guys want to try it, and we can get some tasting notes, but what I love about this wheated bourbon is it's got those classic wheated bourbon, like mid palate softness, real nice and sweet from that wheat addition. But I love the finish on this whiskey. So it's really viscous. So when I, use the words oily or viscous, it's when you swirl around your Glencairn, you see those little legs coming down, kind of like a red wine. We're able to actually control bringing the oils from the grain over through distillation. And you do that by running your still a little bit slower and a little bit lower proof coming off the still. And when you do that, if you're creating good flavors, it hangs around on your tongue a little bit longer and on your palate and just lets you enjoy those flavors. This wheated bottled in bond bourbon, for me, sets itself apart from other wheated bourbons out there for the finish. It's just got this nice long finish that gives you kind of that nice just warming in your chest. And I don't talk a lot. I don't like to lead or talk about tasting notes too much. But one of the things that I get on this bourbon that's really unique for a wheater is I get some like almost chocolate notes on the very finish and the end. And you want to talk about a whiskey that goes great with cigars. When people ask me, this is the one that I always recommend, because that nice warm finish, those kind of chocolatey notes, but then that sweet backbone is just, for me, it's perfect with a cigar.
Yeah, I was about to say, I got a lot of vanilla personally.
Yeah, I mean, I almost feel like I get a little honey in there. Like, yeah. I mean, but listen, man, I thought the rye was going to be hard to top, and I'm not a weeded guy.
And I mean, he kind of got you on the hook with the whole cigar.
Well, no, not even that. Like, so I'm pretty honest about what I like and what I don't like, and I'm not a huge fan of weeded. Mm-hmm. This, however, it's done well, right? So normally with weeded, I find that the flavor profile is just muted, right? There's not enough flavor that comes through. With this, I got everything I wanted in flavor, and surprisingly, at a lower proof. So,
but I mean, just like what you were saying earlier, this is a really great introduction into whiskey, into bourbon, into ball and bond, wheaters, and kind of getting that kind of baby steps. You don't want to someone who's never had a dark spirit.
Yeah, you don't want to jump off a cliff.
In the deep end with
you don't want to jump off a cliff.
Yeah, so that's a great starter whiskey. And I mean, it's I definitely, once you started kind of talking about it, I was getting like dark chocolate, but on the very front of it, I was getting a lot of vanilla.
It's just an amazing sweetness.
Yeah, and a lot of those notes come from also the cooperage that we use. So we worked with Independent Stave when we first, before we even started really producing whiskey at full bore. And I took my first new make down there to them, and they actually helped us design 2 custom char toast combination barrels that just match perfectly with our sweet mash distillate. So they're all char 1 with a complex, very, very complex toast. So for people that like to nerd out, I mean, barrel science is the most fascinating. But what they found is everybody always talked about, char 4, char 3. And what they found is that through research is that the nice, robust toffee, caramel, vanilla flavors that they were getting from those char 3, char 4 barrels had nothing to do with the thickness of the char, and had everything to do with the fact that the longer you have a barrel on fire, the more toast it creates, toasting of those sugars, caramelizing those sugars, those wood sugars behind that char. So, but everything that's the char, it's just like activated charcoal. It'll take off flavors, but it adds nothing to the flavor of the whiskey. So what Andrew Weabrink and the team at Independent Stave discovered and this is kind of what they helped with the Makers program, Makers 46, and the Makers selection, where you can get those different staves, is if you toast that wood and not light it on fire, it's like if you took a handful of white sugar and just put it in your mouth, versus taking that white sugar, putting it in a pan and stirring it until it turns into caramel. It's the same thing with toasting a barrel. So what Andrew figured out was they can toast a barrel long enough to caramelize the sugars way deep into the wood. Then they just do a flash char on the inside. So now your whiskey has all that caramelized sugar in that wood to bring forward. So I think that also is a big factor that brings so much dessert character to our whiskey and really pumps up those vanillins and the caramel and the toffee and the mocha that you get from toasted barrels.
Okay, that I've never heard that before, and that's honestly, it's one of those things. Now that you say it, it kind of makes sense.
It makes sense, right?
It totally makes sense. Like
it absolutely makes sense.
It's like making maple syrup. It doesn't come out maple syrup out of the tree. It comes out, and you got to kind of cook the maple syrup. So it's like you're cooking the syrup, in the barrel. Like it makes perfect sense.
What I love about all this stuff is, these down the road, people figure out ways to improve processes. But the original, whiskey put in a charred barrel wasn't to create amazing flavors. It was utilitarian. They had a barrel that maybe had, I don't know, some fish in it or nuts or whatever, and they wanted to make sure that the flavor didn't carry through to the whiskey they were putting in. So they burned the inside of the barrel to get the flavor out. And then it just so happened that then when they put whiskey in there, it was getting all these cool wood sugars. So I just love whiskey is endlessly fascinating in the history of how we got to where we are, because it's a pretty basic process. You gotta try real hard to really mess it up. But there are so many hundreds of little things you can do along the way that can take you from good to excellent.
That's super cool.
Yeah, man.
No, and as you were talking about the barrels, there was once again kind of sinking down into the YouTube algorithm hole. Jace Townsend and Son, they do a 18th century living history reenactment channel, and they actually went to Louisville, Kentucky. I think they have a history site, and they're talking about whiskeys and basically what you said. It was like, whiskey was white, and then it just kind of was an accident that we put it in a charred barrel.
We put it in this barrel,
and it just kind of like,
dark.
Wow, okay, this is interesting. We like this. So
yeah.
For all your fans that might be traveling down to the Bourbon Trail, first of all, Hard Truth's only about an hour and 15 minutes away, so come up and see us. Guarantee you'll be blown away with our experience. But second of all, after you visit us, if you're going down towards Lebanon, Kentucky, if you're going to Maker's Mark or Limestone Branch or one of those distilleries down there, look up Kentucky Cooperage. That's Independent Staves Cooperage in Lebanon, Kentucky. And they actually offer tours to the public. And I am telling you, if you've never been on a cooperage tour and you're a bourbon fan, you're missing out. It is the most fascinating process. The tour is awesome. And as much technology goes into those barrels, at the end of the day, it's still fire and wood and angry dudes with hammers. And, it's the smells are incredible. And watching them make those barrels is just endlessly fascinating. And what you smell almost smells like roasted marshmallows in there. And once you're in a cooperage, you're like, oh my gosh, I can totally taste that in my whiskey. And I always have. I just wasn't drawing it directly to the charring and toasting of those barrels.
Well, that's awesome, man. Listen, thank you so much for coming out and joining us this evening. And once again, thanks for coming out and sharing the experience with me too.
It's great bottles, man. I enjoyed all three pours, and I think I'm gonna have to go and visit my local store and pick up a few.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm gonna have to restock because I'm pretty sure my sweet mash is getting a little light.
Yeah, just a little.
For folks out there, you can go to hardtruth.com. We've got one of those little spirit finder widgets, and you can put in your zip code, and it'll tell you where the closest place that you can find our spirits. There's a little drop-down menu so you can choose, whichever whiskey you want. But we're currently in 23 states, getting ready to open up 3 more states this month. So we're going into Colorado, New Jersey, and West Virginia the next month. So we're a little bit farther and wider than people think, but we're just getting started in a few of those markets. So hardtruth.com, you can find us wherever you are.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And guys, thanks for tuning in today and watching this really interesting episode on bourbon and rye and all things in between. So cheers to everybody.
Cheers. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.